Hello everyone, and thank you for coming to today's webinar in which we'll be covering the data pad in LabChart in quite some detail. My name is Jeremy Fowler and I'm the Scientific Technical Manager for the Asia Pacific region, and I'll be taking you through the webinar today. But before we get started, just like to go through a couple of small things. Firstly, all the audio from you, the attendees, will be muted throughout the presentation. However, you do have the opportunity to type in questions either throughout the webinar or towards the end of the webinar, and I'll be addressing all of these questions at the end of sort of the main content that I wanted to cover. And before we get started as well, I'd just like to go through the intended use of 8 Instruments products, and that is that basically all 8 Instruments products are intended for use in teaching and research applications and environments only, and cannot be used to either diagnose, treat, or monitor a subject. So basically, they can't be used in a medical sense in a clinical setting, but all our products can be used for research purposes, even in a clinical setting as well. But having said that, we do have some of our manufactured front ends which are safe for connection to human subjects, and these are denoted by the body protected or the BF symbol. And basically means that these front ends are suitable for connection because there's no because these are isolated from the electrical mains. And also we have a front end, a blood pressure amp, which has this cardiac protected symbol. That means that these front end is suitable for connection to human subjects, even when there is a direct electrical connection to the heart. And further, all 8 Instruments manufactured products come under a quality system, the ISO 9001 system, and that covers all the design, manufacture, sale and servicing of all of 8 Instruments data recording, instrumentation and our software as well. So, and finally, just before we get into the webinar, I'd just like to go through some of the events coming up on our training calendar. We have these LabChart training courses, which basically take attendees through right from the very beginning of setting up LabChart to record their signals using the PowerLab, right through to some sort of signal processing and advanced analyses as well. And we have 4 upcoming courses in the coming months. We have one next week actually in Auckland, New Zealand, where there's still a few tickets available for that. Then we're hosting a course in Sydney towards the end of January next year, and also 2 new courses which we've just announced. The first is in Melbourne. That's going to be held on the 10th to 11th of February next year, and also one in Perth, which will be held on the 4th to the 5th of March. And further information about these courses can be found on our website in the events section here, or also you can email me at training.au@8instruments.com for more information as well. And we have one more webinar scheduled for this year. That's coming up on Tuesday the 17th of December, and that'll be covering a very useful topic of adding comments to your recording and using these comments for your analyses and navigating through your data. So yeah, that takes place mid-December, and we'll also be scheduling more webinars in the first few months of next year as well, and these will be added to our website, also at the events section in the coming weeks. And again, further information about these webinars, you can get this by just emailing webinar.au@8instruments.com as well. Okay, so getting into the webinar for today, so we're going to be looking at the DataPad, which you'll see is a very useful and powerful tool within LabChart. So we'll be starting with an overview of the DataPad. I'll be showing you how to set up the DataPad to extract the information from your data in ChartView. Okay, we're going through different ways of extracting that data from the chart view in its graphical form into its numerical form in the DataPad. And then once we have the data in the DataPad, then working with it to perform calculations as well. And then finally, we'll be finishing up with the different options for exporting the data into other programs for further analyses as well. Okay, so we're going to go straight into LabChart now. Okay, and I'm going to use this example data file. Okay, this is just a blood pressure recording. There's 2 different types of blood pressure. In channel 1 we have the ventricular blood pressure, and in channel 2 we have an arterial pressure recording. Okay, and we're just going to use this as an example of sort of typical data which can be used to be analysed using the DataPad. Okay, so the first thing to do when using the datapad is to obviously open the datapad itself. And there's a couple of different ways of doing this. The first is using a button on the toolbar. So the datapad has its own little section here in the toolbar, and to open the datapad, you can simply click on it on the first button here, and that'll open the datapad. Okay, and the second way of opening the datapad is navigating up to the window menu and selecting datapad from the drop down there. Okay, and this is the datapad itself, and we can also tile the datapad so we can see the datapad. Oops, I think I just closed it. Oh no, I didn't. I just minimize it down here. We can arrange our windows so we can see both our datapad and our chart view at the same time. So I'm just going to expand that out to something how I like it, and then use our Smart Tile tool, and you can see now at the top I've got the datapad, and down the bottom I've got our original data in the chart view. Okay, so I'm just going to now point out sort of the different features of the datapad view itself. Okay, so it looks a bit like a spreadsheet. Okay, and essentially is a spreadsheet, and there's two different sort of modes that the datapad works in. Okay, the first mode is row mode. So as you can see, as I click down the datapad window, I select a whole row at a time, and basically this is the mode in which we extract our data from our chart view into the datapad. Okay, and we'll be doing this in just a moment. There's also another mode called cell edit mode, and again we'll be using this towards the end of the webinar, in which now each of these cells can be accessed individually. Okay, and we can use this mode to actually perform additional calculations on our data. Okay, but I'll be going into cell mode in more detail a bit later on. So we're going to stick with row mode at the beginning here. Okay, and I'm now going to show you how to set up the datapad to basically perform the type of analyses that you want to do. Okay, depending on what you want to do, you need to set up these columns in the datapad to perform a specific type of calculation. Okay, so by default, in my chart view, you can see I've got three channels. The first two channels have data, whereas the channel 3 is just a blank channel. And by default, the datapad assumes that you want to calculate means. So I've got in column A here, I'm calculating the mean of the blood pressure signal in channel 1, okay, which is ventricular pressure. Okay. In column 2, I'm calculating the mean of the arterial pressure signal, which is in channel 2. In channel 3, there's no data there, but we're going to be calculating the mean if there was data in there. Okay, and we can, of course, change the type of calculation which is going to be occurring in these different columns simply by clicking on this sort of column heading up the top here. Okay, and that brings up this column setup dialog box. Okay, and this is where we set the different types of calculations that we want to perform. Okay, and these calculations are arranged in a series of different sort of categories here. Okay, so the most commonly used ones are up the top, and then we go into more specific calculations further down the bottom. Okay, so we can either turn the calculation completely off, so when we're actually adding data to the datapad won't actually perform any calculation on the data. Okay, we can select a statistical calculation such as mean, median, standard deviation, and so forth. The selection and active point category sort of gives information about where you're selecting the data from the chart view. Okay, so you can know exactly when in your recording that particular data is coming from, and we're doing the calculation on that particular data. Okay, comments, we can extract information about the different types of comments which are in your recording, such as the comment time, the actual comment text, and I'll be showing you this in a moment as well. And then we have other types of calculations such as slope calculations, integral, information about the data blocks. We can perform cyclic measurement calculations. Okay, we can look at specific things about the scope view, spectrum, and then some of our analysis modules also have calculations which can be performed in the datapad. So here I've got the spike histogram module turned on. So here we have some specific calculations based around that spike histogram module, and also the XY loop as well. Okay, we're going to focus mainly on these first ones today. Okay, so we're just going to leave the calculation as the mean because that's fairly straightforward and is fine for sort of this demonstration purposes. Okay, so throughout today we're going to be looking at the calculation of mean pressure values in both our ventricular pressure and our arterial pressure channels, and also we may do a few other calculations in these additional columns here. But to start off with, we're going to stick with mean. Okay, and I'm just going to show you a few other features of this dialog box before we go on. Okay, so I originally selected the top of column 1 to adjust the calculation for this particular column. But we can navigate across our columns by simply clicking on these directional arrows up the top here. So to move to the right, we just select on the right hand arrow. To move to the left, we just select on the left arrow here. Okay, so I'm going to leave these first 2 columns as they are, but in column 3, I want to know exactly when in our data that calculation's been extracted, so I'm just going to put a simple time in column 3, and you'll see this working in just a moment. Okay. Oops. I'll leave that as time. Okay, I'm going to go back to our first column here to show you some of the different other features of this particular dialog box. Okay, so typically column 1 will not have to correlate or correspond to channel 1 in your chart. You can actually select which channel you want to extract the data from. Okay, I'm going to leave it at channel 1 in this case. Okay, and there's also a few other options down the bottom here. We can choose to only add the data from the chart view to the data pad if the selection that you make in the chart view includes that particular channel. Okay, or you can actually select this option here, which ignores this particular part of the dialog. Basically, it will add data from the lowest selected channel. So if I select, say, channels 1 and 3 from the chart view, it'll only add data to that particular column in the data pad from channel 1, because that's sort of the first or the lowest channel number. Okay, but I'm just going to leave it. Typically, you just leave it. You'd specify a channel here and click on OK. And also, you can choose to have a mini window for that particular column as well. So if I select mini window here, click on OK, and this mini window pops up here. Okay, and that mini window there corresponds to the current selection in the chart view. Okay, and you'll see in column 1, or sorry, row 1 of the data pad, this row here always corresponds to the current selection in the chart view. Okay, so as I move around my chart view, the current selection or the current value in this row 1 of the data pad will update to match that particular reading in the chart view. And we can also make a selection here. So now we're selecting a region of data. So this value here corresponds to the mean ventricular pressure in that particular selection. Okay, this value in column 2, corresponds to the mean pressure value in our channel 2 data. Okay, and this time in column 3 corresponds to the start of my selection. Or if I make a single point selection, it corresponds to that exact point in my chart view. Okay, and as I move around, you can see that mini window also updates. Okay, so I can actually have a mini window for each particular column. I can also create a mini window by dragging this out. Okay, so I'll do that again. I hover over my column title, click, and drag out. Okay, so I can have a different mini window for each particular column. And I can use the Tile Mini Windows button up in the toolbar here to arrange those mini windows nicely up the top of my lab chart window. Okay, so now I've got my 3 columns in DataPad set up to extract my mean pressure values and also the time. Okay, but now we actually have to get the data from our chart view into the DataPad to sort of store it there permanently. Okay, and there's different ways of doing this. Okay, so I'm just going to go through them now. And the first way, which is a manual way, basically we just select either a single point or a selection of our data. Okay, and we can add it to the DataPad by simply clicking on the Add to DataPad button in the toolbar. We can go to the Commands menu and click on Add to DataPad. Or we can use a shortcut key, which is Control D by default, and that also adds the data to the DataPad. Okay, so they're the 3 main ways of adding a selection of data to the DataPad, and also it works exactly the same if we make a single point selection. So I just select it anywhere in my chart view, click Add to DataPad, and it adds that value. Okay, but because it's only a single point in our chart view, these values in our mean columns actually correspond to the actual value at that particular point. And we can also double click in our chart view to manually add single point selections to the DataPad as well. Okay, and you'll see that these titles also appear in the data pad once we've started adding data. That's basically makes it easier to sort of see what's actually happening in that particular column when we say copy and paste it to another program, for example. Okay, so that's manually adding the data to the data pad. Okay, and there's also a more automated way, which I'm going to show you now, and that's using a tool called Multiple Add to Data Pad. Okay, this is an offline tool. So this is a tool that you use to add data to the data pad in a more automated fashion once you've actually finished recording your data in LabChart. Okay, and you can access the Multiple Add to Data Pad tool in two different ways. You can click on this particular button in the toolbar up here, or we can go to Commands and select Multiple Add to Data Pad. Okay, and then there's 4 different options here for using Multiple Add to Data Pad. We can find the data in the chart view using time, using comments in your chart view, using event markers, and also using scope pages as well. And I'm going to quickly show you the different ways of using these different types of find commands. Okay, so the first and most straightforward, I guess, or most commonly used is time. Okay, so basically we just need to set the amount of time that we want to select and how often we want to select that time. Okay, so so this is the length of selection, so I'm going to leave that as 1 second. We can also do much longer or shorter selections as well. And I want to select 1 second every second. Okay, so what it's going to do is that's going to move from the start of my data to the end of my data, making 1 second selections and adding those 1 second selections from the chart view into the data pad. Okay, and this allows the final selection to be shorter, enables you to add a shorter period than 1 second at the end of the data. So if I had a 0.5 second selection at the end, that's fine. Or I can deselect that and everything will be based on a 1 second selection. Okay, and I can choose to step through the whole file or just a particular block containing my current selection. So I'm going to step through the whole file because I've only got one data block here. I click on Add, and you can see now it's gone through my entire file, making 1 second selections, and automatically added those selections to my data pad here. Okay, so that's fine using the multiple add to data pad using time. And we can also add using multiple add to data pad using comments as well. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to add a couple of comments to my data using just the add comment feature. So I'm just going to add one comment which says start. I'm going to add that comment across all of my channels. And I'm going to have one comment over here which is going to say end. Okay, so I've now got 2 comments which I can use to add specific regions of my data to the data pad. And of course, if you've got many more comments, you can use all those different types of comments to select particular regions of your data. But hopefully you can get the idea by just using this very simple example, which I'm going to show you now. Okay, so this time we're going to find our data using comments. Okay, and we can choose a specific comment. So I'm going to use my start comment. Okay. You can choose to make a certain period of time selection around a particular comment, before a comment or after a comment. Or we can actually say, I want to select all my data from one particular comment to another comment. Okay, so actually I'll show you the first way first. So I'm going to say, I want to select 1 second around my particular start comment. Okay, and if I do that, you can see now I've made a 1 second selection. It's taken 1 second. So it's taken half a second before and half a second after to give me a total 1 second selection, and that selection is shown here. Okay, so it's got that 53.97 corresponds to the start of my selection here. Okay, and also we can select to the next comment. So I can make a selection between my start comment and my end comment. Okay, and if I type in end here, click on add, you can see now my selection corresponds from my start comment to my end comment, and that period's been added. So my mean ventricular pressure value in this case was this value here, my mean arterial pressure was this one, and the time corresponds to the exact time that my start comment was inserted in my recording. Okay, so that's adding using multiple add using comments. Okay, the next way is using event markers. Okay, so event markers are generated when we use some of our different channel calculations or when we're using some of our analysis modules. So I'm going to do a very simple channel calculation in channel 3 using cyclic measurements, and I'm just going to do a simple calculation of heart rate based on my ventricular pressure signal. Okay, and I'm going to turn on my event markers. So you can see now in channel 1 here I've got event markers corresponding to each of my sort of cycles, okay, based on this cyclic measurement calculation which we've done in channel 3. And we can actually use these event markers to add those regions of data to the data pad. So again, I can go to Commands, I select Multiple Add to Data Pad, and this time I want to find my data using event markers. And in this particular case, our event markers are in channel 1. And we can choose to make a single point selection at the event marker. We can choose to make a selection for a period of time around that particular event marker, just as we did for comments. We can select before or after as well. Or we can make a selection to the next event marker. So we can make a selection between detected cycles. Okay, and again, we can choose to step through the whole file. And if I click on Add this time, okay, what it's done, you can see my final selection here is between my final two event markers. Basically, it's gone from the start of my file all the way to the end of my file, adding that period of so each cycle, and it's calculated the mean blood pressure in those different cycles. Okay, and you can see now in all this sort of demonstration that I've actually added 374 rows of data to my data pad. And the final way I want to show you of adding data to the data pad using this multiple add feature is using scope pages. And to do that, I'm actually going to open a separate file. Okay, so I'm just going to close this file completely. And I'm going to open a separate file here, which has Scope View. Okay, so Scope View is our inbuilt sort of digital oscilloscope feature which enables us to overlay signals on top of each other. So here on the right-hand side, we've got Chart View, and you can see Chart View is broken down into these short, approximately 500 millisecond recordings of what looks like a finger pulse signal, and all of those individual recordings have been overlaid on top of each other in Scope View. Okay, and we can actually add data to the data pad based on these individual scope pages. And it works in a similar way to all these other techniques which we've used so far. So again, we go to, actually I need to set up the data pad because it's a new file. Okay. So this file doesn't have any channel names, but basically our pulse signal is in channel 1. Okay, so you get the idea. As we add data, we're going to be adding our mean value from our pulse signal into column 1 of the data pad, and we can actually turn off all of the other channels. Oh, let's turn off the other visible channels. Click on OK. Okay, so I've only got column 1 of our data pad active. And now I just go to Commands. I use Multiple Add to Data Pad, and this time I select Find using Scope Pages. Okay, and I can choose to add data based on a whole scope page or a certain time period based on the trigger that was used to create that scope page. All right, but in this case, I'm just going to add that whole scope page. So basically, it's going to select that page, that 500 millisecond period of time, and add each of those individual scope pages to the data pad. So if I click on Add here, I had 30 odd pages of scope view data here. So I've got 31 pages here, and so taking away our columns here, I've now got 31 pages, so 31 rows of data in my data pad based on those individual scope pages on the left-hand side. Okay, so that's the 4 different methods of using Multiple Add to Data Pad to get data from either your chart view or scope view into the data pad very quickly and easily. Okay, so you can imagine if you have hours and hours of recording, you can use these Multiple Add to Data Pad features to add a lot of data to the data pad very quickly. Okay, and remember that's adding the data once you've finished sampling in chart view. Okay, if we want to add data while we're sampling, we use a feature called Timed Add to Data Pad. And so I'm actually going to open up that same blood pressure file, but this time I'm going to open it as a playback file. And basically, I can play back this file, and as it's recording, we can automatically add the data from ChartView into the datapad. I'm just going to have to quickly set up the datapad to something similar to what we had before. I'm just going to reduce the number of channels back down to 2 in our chart view. I'll just shrink that down, open up our datapad. Okay, I'll use SmartTile. And so again, we've got our ventricular pressure in mean in column 1, our arterial pressure mean in column 2, and I'll set up column 3 to have our selection and active point of just our simple time as well. Okay, and I might set up a 4th column here to have the duration of our selection as well. Okay, and so this time, instead of going to the commands menu, we go to the setup menu and we select timed add to datapad. Okay, and we just tick this checkbox here, which enables us to add the data to the datapad repeatedly while sampling. We choose to select our data from either chart view or scope view. This time we'll use chart view, and then we basically select how much data we want to select each time and how often we want to select it. Okay, so by default it's got 3 seconds every 3 seconds. So this period here actually has to be at least the length of the selection, otherwise you'll come up with this error message. Okay, so basically I might have 3 seconds, I'll leave it as 3 seconds every 3 seconds. So basically it's going to make a 3-second selection, wait for 3 more seconds of data to be recorded, make another 3-second selection and add that to the datapad. Okay, and you'll see this repeatedly over and over again throughout the recording. Okay, I simply click on OK. And if I start sampling here, we've made our first 3-second selection, that's been added to the datapad. Our next 3-second selection, so we'll just see that build up. Okay, and I'll just click stop. Okay, so that's the way we add data to the datapad while we're recording, and that's the timed add to datapad feature. Okay, so there are the different ways of getting data from your chart view or scope view into the datapad. Okay, and now we're going to look at different ways of sort of manipulating or using this data once it's in the chart view, or sorry, in the datapad. Okay, and so I'm just going to close or minimize chart view down the bottom here for a second or for a moment, and we're going to focus solely on the datapad. Okay, so I mentioned right at the start, we've got 2 different modes in which datapad operates. The first is row mode, which is the mode that we're adding data from our chart view or scope view into the datapad itself. And then there's cell edit mode, okay, where we can address each of our cells individually. Okay, we can use this as a spreadsheet to sort of perform calculations on the data which we've extracted into the datapad. So it works in a similar way to Excel, in which, for example, if I wanted to perform a calculation on the data, I just select a cell that I want to perform the calculation in. I can go up the top here and I can select the different functions. Okay, so these are the different functions which are available. Or of course we could just type the function in manually as well. Okay, so if I just do a very simple sum, so I can select sum, and if I want to add all my arterial mean pressures from cell B5 to B12, I can just say B5 to B12, or I could have just also manually selected those cells as well. Okay, click enter, and we've got our sum over here. Okay, so that's just doing a simple calculation based on the data that we've extracted into the datapad. Okay, we can also use these types of calculations to perform calculations in real time as well. Okay, so imagine if I can actually click on this row 1 in column F, okay, and I can enter. Okay, actually I'll get a fresh column here which hasn't been used previously. Okay, I'm going in column I, and I can go up here, and again I can type in a function. So I can just type in equals sum. Oops. If I get the equal sign, so sum, And I can add, for example, two columns together. So if I could add column A1, which is my mean ventricular pressure, to column 2. Oops. B1, we'll get there in a second. Okay, and now I can drag that down. Okay, and you can see now it's summed up the values. It's added A5 to B5 to give I5. Okay, and as we actually add more data to the data pad, it'll automatically do this calculation on all data coming in. Okay, so if I add a few more values here, I can just do that manually. Okay, it's automatically adding those two columns together in column I. And we can also use these types of calculations to sort of give you a running total while we're adding data to the data pad. Okay, so I've already got some data added to the data pad, obviously. But if I select this cell down here in column B, and I can say, type in equals sum, oops, it's B5 to B16. Okay, and to do these types of running totals, we need to leave one blank row after the data that we've already added. Okay, because that's the row that all new data is going to be added into. Okay, and as the new data is added to that particular row, our running total will also increase by that particular value. Okay, so if I click on Enter now, we've got our running total, and as I add more data to the data pad, our running total also increases. Okay, so the running total in this particular cell here, just do it again. Okay, but as I said, it's just important to keep one blank row there all the time. Okay, and you can see even as we're adding data now, we're also adding to our calculated column in column I over here. Okay, so just a few other little sort of features of the data pad to get through. The first one is that all the rows in DataPad are linked back to the original selection that you made in the chart view. Okay, so if I double click on a row in the DataPad, oops, I need to go back to row mode to do this. Okay, if I double click on a row in the DataPad, it automatically scrolls back to your chart view to that exact selection that you made. Okay, so double clicking is sort of the automatic way of doing it. You can also click there. You can right click and choose reselect data in the chart view, and that'll automatically scroll as well to your chart view. Okay, but double clicking is obviously the easiest way of doing that. Okay, and another feature you can use is to you can actually change the type of calculations after you've already added your data to the data pad. Okay, so I've got my two mean columns here, I've got my time column here, I've got my selection duration here, but if I wanted to change the calculation, if I want to add a calculation, for example in column F here, I can click on that. I can go, say, to selection active point, and I can say selection start. And in column G, I can say I want to have my selection end. Okay, and then we can then select that column. Oops. And right click, and we can go recalculate all rows. We get a warning, and you can see now it's automatically populated all the rows based on that new calculation that you've done up the top. Okay, and likewise, if you wanted to do, say, this, we did that sum, we manually typed the formula into cell I1, and if we did that again, say in column J, we could then type in the formula, right-click, and say recalculate all rows, and it again will recalculate based on that particular formula that you put up the top there. Okay. And there's a few other buttons on the right-hand side over here. These are basically shortcuts for what I've shown you before. Okay, so again, if I select a row, click on this button here, it'll go back to that selection in the chart view, which corresponds to that particular row. There's also the option to update the rows, so that's if you change calculation, you can update the rows in the datapad based on a new calculation that you've set. There's also a few other buttons, for example the Show Cell Formula button here, which actually shows you the formula which is in those particular cells. Okay, so I've got our simple sum formulas here and also our running total down the bottom over here. And actually when you export your data from the datapad into something else, say Excel, it's best to actually show your cell formula before copying, because if you simply just copy the value, the cell formula behind that value won't be copied, it will only be the value itself. But if we show cell formula first, then copy, that cell formula will actually be copied as well, okay, which will make your life a lot easier. Okay, and I haven't shown you this yet, but we can actually set our cell format as well. So we can do it in different ways, but I guess the easiest way is clicking on the cell format button on the right hand side over here, and then we can choose the type of sort of value that we want to show. So number, general, and scientific notation, for example. And if we click on Format Cells, we get more sort of options where we can actually set, say, the number of decimal places, for example, as well, just as you would in Excel. Okay, so that's basically all the little features of the datapad, except for adding new sheets. Okay, so just as in other spreadsheet programs, we can actually add new sort of spreadsheets to our datapad. We can do this by clicking on this Create Worksheet button down the bottom left-hand side. Okay, and that creates these new worksheets with the default name of Sheet 1, Sheet 2. And these additional sheets can be used for performing additional calculations on your data. Okay, and these are only active in cell edit mode. Okay, so the only sheet which you can actually add data from the datapad, so from chart view and scope view into the datapad, is using this datapad sheet down the bottom here. Okay, and you can't change the name of that particular sheet, but you can change the name of these additional sheets by right-clicking and selecting Rename. Okay, and then you can actually copy and paste data from the datapad. So copy, paste, and then you can perform calculations just as you would in the first sheet, the datapad sheet as well. Okay, and you can have as many sheets as you want. And one final thing which I haven't shown you yet in the datapad is you can actually rename these columns as well. So to rename it, we can just right-click up the top here, and we can select Rename. And so instead of having that long name, we can just say LVP mean, for example. Click on OK, and we've got that. Okay, so that's the datapad. The final thing I want to show you is actually getting the data from the datapad into another program. And it's really simple. We just select the data that we want to. You can either copy a selection or you can copy the entire datapad. So if I just wanted to copy this data at the top here, I can select that data. I can go to Edit, and I can go to Copy Datapad Data, and I can then go to Excel, bring that across, and paste it there. Okay, then we can perform additional analyses or plotting or whatever you want to in Excel. Okay, so that's really simple, getting data from the datapad into other programs. Okay, and if you want to select entire columns, we just select in row 1 and we drag across. Okay, so I've selected basically everything that we've added to the datapad today, or in this, since I've opened this particular file, and I can go Edit and copy datapad data and paste it into Excel, or I can actually export the data into a separate file where I just go File and Export. Okay, and we choose Export datapad only as text file or as Unicode text. Okay, and that'll create individual files which can then be opened in any sort of spreadsheet program supporting text files. Okay, so that basically ends the main sort of component of the webinar for today. But before we finish up, I'm just going to show you my contact details. I'm going to go back to PowerPoint here, and this is now be a good opportunity for you to type in any questions that you may have. which we can get to in just a moment. So these are both my contact details and your local technical support engineer's details. So my contact details for all sort of training information or yes, information about our training courses or our webinars. You can contact me by either calling me or emailing me. And there's also those other email addresses which I put earlier on in this PowerPoint presentation. And there's also Paramore Catcher, who's our local support engineer, which should be your first kind of point of call for all technical support related questions. And you can get him on either of these two email addresses here. Okay, and of course this recorded webinar will be uploaded to the Vimeo site in the next day or so, and you'll receive an email giving you the link in, I think, 2 days from now. So you should receive that email on Thursday or as soon as that's available on Vimeo. Okay, so thank you all for attending, and so please ask any questions. Otherwise, we'll see you next time.